Hello, everyone, and welcome on into the conference championship version of the Big Brains here. Myself, Joe Tanzi, and Mark Henry Jr. taking you through all 9 of the conference championship games this weekend. 2 of them, obviously, massive ones in Penn State, Oregon in the Big Ten, and Georgia, Texas in the SEC. I'd say Clemson, SMU in the ACC is probably right on that like 1A, 1B line as well because of its significance to the playoff. And let's get right into it, Mark, because that's the big debate going into these games on Saturday is how exactly do these results affect the playoff? I think the first and foremost thing is in the ACC, is it just straight up SMU or Alabama?
No, I do think if SMU loses a game similar to how we saw TCU lose the Big 12 championship a couple of years ago against Oklahoma State. I think it was either they barely missed a late touchdown or Oklahoma State barely got a late touchdown to win. It was one or the other.
Came down right to the wire, yeah.
Yeah, it came down right to the wire. It was within one possession. It was a close game the whole way. If it's something like that, I think SMU's probably fine. But if SMU loses and it doesn't feel like that, I don't even know if it necessarily has a point total attached to it. It might be anything over a possession. I think if that's the case, Bama's in for sure. But the books now are telling you Bama's around like minus 395, which is obviously a lot higher than SMU's money line this weekend. Right. So that would tell you the books at this point are thinking that it's going to be Bama no matter what.
So I think the important thing here is SMU wins and they're in regardless. We don't have this conversation. This is kind of just a parachute conversation. If Clemson does beat SMU, and then all of a sudden Clemson is in the field, probably the weakest of the 12 teams in the field. If we're being honest, maybe the Big 12 champion is, but Clemson is definitely ranked in the bottom quadrant, and somehow they end up getting a top 4 seed out of it. So how do we look at this game? Because I think it's not the most eye-catching game because it could be a rout. SMU could just completely blow the doors off of Clemson and play really well like they have the last 2 weeks. And we're not even having this discussion by halftime on Saturday night. But with it being, I think the spread's only, 2.5 points in favor of SMU. Is that just the books just not respecting SMU as much? Point totals down to 2, over-under is 55.5. Like, how do we – because if you watch these two teams – SMU is very clearly the better team than Clemson, and it's not even remotely close. Clemson hasn't been able to sniff their best opponents all season, and we just saw them lose by 3 points to South Carolina. So is it just as simple as SMU is the better team, they'll get in, and we won't have to have this conversation?
I'm kind of 2 minds about it, where the SMU thing, there's part of me that has some pity for them if they get left out. There's part of me that I tweeted out kind of before the rankings came out that SMU should be safe with a loss next week, but I don't think that's going to be the case. But here we are, and now I'm starting to get a little bit annoyed at the pre-crying for SMU going on all over the place. And it's like, you know what? You play a Clemson team that's not very good. They got whooped by Louisville. They lost 34-3 to a Georgia team that lost to an Alabama team that you're arguing you should be in over if you lose. So not to do college football math, it's not exactly the most linear thing all the time, but I do think that that's worth bringing up, that Clemson is – I don't think Clemson's one of the 20 best teams in football this year, so across the country. So they might win the game. They might get in. You're right. I think they would be just about the worst team in the field, if not the worst team in the field. And – with SMU, I'm starting. I heard Brace kind of say, "Your SMU, your playoff game is this weekend," and I kind of agree. There's part of me that's kind of moving to there and kind of feeling less sympathy the longer we go here and the more I'm hearing people cry about it. I don't know if that's fair, but that's kind of where I'm landing.
No, I think that's fair because everybody's starting the pre-built-in excuses, right? To say, well, SMU should be in or they shouldn't be in, whatever it may be. Just go out and win the damn game, and I think they will. I think the 2-point spread is actually. I think that's actually incredibly disrespectful. Now, look, they haven't played the best opposition in the last 2 weeks in Virginia and Cal, but they've shown that the defense is getting better. the offense clearly, look, if they had started the season with Kevin Jennings at quarterback instead of Preston Stone, we're potentially talking about an undefeated SMU team. And still, their only loss is by a few points to BYU. It's still a remarkable season, but if you saw the way the committee treated Miami in Tuesday's rankings, look, it's very clear the ACC and the Big 12 have no favor. And they're kind of right. If you look at the broader picture here of the four conferences, the SEC is, I think, the best. There's no like elite conference this year that you could say this one's clearly better than the rest. The Big Ten has a very, very solid top four, and then the rest is kind of meh. And then the ACC, Syracuse getting better, I guess, helps their overall totality. But the thing you run into is not all these teams are playing each other because the conferences are now so big, because realignment is a thing. So now you're running into this issue of, well, yeah, the top of these conferences are good, but how many of these teams have played each other? And you look at Clemson's schedule, they played Louisville and got run off the field at home in a game they needed to win because they were climbing back up to the fringe of the playoff at that point. To me, it just feels like SMU, they're playing the better football. They are the better team. I think 2 points is just wildly disrespectful.
Talking on mute, I just realized there. I'm having a weird fan versus kind of gambling weekend coming up here. And I'll get into that when we talk about some of the seeding potential stuff and Notre Dame's involvement and all that and the 5-6 seed. But putting that aside, on Monday, I was setting up my bets for the week, and SMU was setting up to be one of my favorite bets of the whole week, whether that be, Packers on Thursday night, SMU, Arizona State. I had a couple favorite bets that I kind of had labeled. And that's when I saw Beef, Ryan Coyle, send in, the prices on the playoff on Twitter. That's where I saw Bama was plus 100 early on Monday morning. And I immediately started firing away text to Tansy and Beef like, am I a crazy person, or is there any difference between betting that SMU money line and betting Bama to make the playoff at plus 100? Within 24 hours, that bet was at minus 265. Now it's sitting around like minus 395 or something like that. So I feel like I kind of made my SMU bet already with Bama to make the playoffs. So I'm not going to double dip. I'm rooting for SMU. If you're asking me the play I would make if I didn't get that bet in, it's absolutely SMU -2. I wouldn't worry about the money line. I would just lay the points. I think they're going to win the game. I think they win the game handily.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Clemson's 3 most notable games this year, they've only played 2 ranked opponents. First, they got run off the field by Georgia. Okay, fair first game of the season, whatever. But then to only put up 14 against South Carolina, which, real quick sidebar, I'm glad we kind of eliminated that cool 48 hours where everybody thought South Carolina would get in the playoff. Like, it was just the most ridiculous thing ever. Like, the rankings have told you what South Carolina was. They weren't going to be able to jump Bama and Ole Miss, and they potentially could have not jumped Miami because of where they fell. I think it's just the silliest thing. Maybe if had they shown up against Ole Miss, then you could make a case, well, maybe the games were coin flips against Alabama and Ole Miss. And let's be honest, the Alabama game didn't become competitive until the second half. There was a really crazy swing at the end of the second quarter that just sucked all the life out of Alabama, and that's how that game got close. And Bama just never recovered, and I think that's also an indictment on Alabama, but we'll get to that when we see them in the first round of the playoff next week. But South Carolina was never getting in. They needed miracles on top of miracles to happen. They needed Mississippi State to win. They needed Auburn to win. They probably may have needed a little more help because of how Miami was going to play into that picture if teams had lost. I mean, we saw it with Indiana a few weeks ago as well. So to me, that conversation was all unnecessary. Like, it was either Alabama or Miami, and that's it. But anyway, Clemson being able to kind of no-show against Louisville, no-show at least offensively against South Carolina, and no-show against Georgia. Look, they're a very good team, but they're not a great team. They're not an elite team. And I don't think there are any elite teams this year in college football. I think that's why the playoff is going to be so fascinating, because we don't know. There are teams that you think are elite, but hell, we thought Ohio State going into this past week was going to be one of those teams, and they completely dropped the ball at home against Michigan. So, and I think that potentially applies to Oregon this weekend as well. Do we know they're that elite? Do we know they're number one, or is it just because of the way their schedule broke? Yeah, you could. I'll say this: the best way to describe it is you can poke more holes in resumes this year,
Yeah.
from top to bottom than you have in any previous year of 14 playoff, 12-team playoff, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have 2019 LSU. You don't have Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, Clemson. You don't have, whatever Saban, Bama team you want to use, the Devontae Smith team, whatever team you want to use of recent memory. It does feel like we've had one of those every year. I would say last year, I don't know if we necessarily had that elite team. We had Michigan, Alabama, and Georgia, I think, all grouped together. Alabama played Michigan to a close game. And then Michigan got lucky I think the bracket broke out that Georgia got left out of that whole thing. That kind of got lost in the whole Florida State getting left out. But it's the thing with Oregon. There's a chance, you're right. There's a chance that they're not an elite team and the schedule propped them up that way. And then I think there's a chance that we're not treating them elite enough.
That's also fair.
I think there's a chance that they might be clearer and ahead of some of these other teams. And you look at the odds, not a difference between those top four teams odds wise, like in terms of the title. It's not like Oregon's, markedly ahead of anybody. So I think there is a chance. They're the one team I would say has the chance to be that elite team this year, where we look back and they're 16 I guess it would be 17-0 if they won the Big Ten championship and then won the national championship. We would look back and be like, man, that was an elite team. But you're right. I mean, it's going to go either way. Either Oregon wins it all and we called them the elite team that we should have saw the whole way, or Oregon loses at some point and we say they were never elite. Their schedule kind of propped them up that way.
So let's talk about Oregon. They're playing Penn State in the Big Ten championship game this weekend. They're a 3-point favorite, over under 50, game in Indianapolis. If James Franklin wasn't Penn State's head coach, and I saw this Penn State roster in totality and the performances they've put together, even for parts of the Ohio State game, I bet Penn State. Look, I know it's crazy to think because you look at the history is screaming right at you in the face. James Franklin only has one win against top 5 opposition. But if you look in this matchup specifically, what did Dan Lanning do with his elite team last year? He lost twice, not once, but twice, to the national championship runner-up in Washington. I know we've heaped a ton of praise on Dan Lanning and what the job he's done at Oregon. But what has he done to prove he's in that Kirby Smart, Nick Saban level yet?
He hasn't. No, you're absolutely right. People have wanted to put him there for a long time. He's not in that. The only retort I'd have to that is that there's only one guy in that right now in this playoff, and it's Kirby. And that's the advantage you have to give Georgia, no matter what happens on Saturday with Texas. Not to get into a Texas-Georgia thing. We'll talk about that in a bit. But everybody else, you got to prove something. James Franklin, what have you done? Marcus Freeman, what have you done? Dan Lanning, what have you done? The list goes on and on. Jeff Heupel, Sark.
Ryan Day certainly hasn't done anything.
Certainly, Ryan Day. Coach Siggs, you can Google him. He wwins, but I don't know if he's at that level. I don't know who I missed going through the teams there. Kalen DeVore, 9-3.
But at least he got to the national championship game last year. Does that give him? But I think the whole point I'm making about Penn State, Oregon is not only do we have a lack of an elite team, a lack of elite head coaches where you can point to like they're the difference maker outside of Kirby Smart. Elite quarterbacks just aren't in the field this year. It's just for whatever reason the season broke. Carson Beck at the beginning of the year, he was supposed to be the big deal. Well, it turns out Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, because of the seasons they're having in the NFL as well, were the reasons why Georgia looked that good last year, and deservedly so. Those two are having a ton of success in the NFL. But if you look across the board here, you're ranking Drew Aller pretty high. in quarterbacks in the top 12. I think I just
Is,
don't know. Like,
is Gabriel
I,
the best quarterback in the field, though?
I don't know. That's what I'm. Is it Jalen Milroe? Right?
It isn't for me. I would go Gabriel over Milroe.
But see, that's the thing to me is like I can't stand here and clear cut say team A or team B or quarterback A or quarterback B is head and shoulders above the rest.
No, definitely not.
And I think that's what makes the Big Ten and the SEC championship game so fascinating is, and let's just lump them together because they both mean so much. In the SEC, you've seen so many flaws from Carson Beck this year, and it was, let's be honest, it was a miracle for them to get past Georgia Tech. And
by the way, funny stat on Carson Beck. I hate being like the Carson Beck guy because I hate how he's played this year.
Mhm.
Leading passer and leading touchdown quarterback out of all the teams that would be in the playoff right now.
Which is insane.
It kind of goes to show your point there for sure.
Right.
12
And then look, you have Quinn Ewers, who's at least been in he's been in the playoff game, but he's not elite.
He looks broken right now.
Right, and I mean he kind of is. He's dealing with the ankle injury. Cam Ward's probably the best talent wise, and he's not going to be in the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look down this list of quarterbacks, let's do it quickly. It's Dylan Gabriel, Quinn Ewers, Drew Aller, Riley Leonard, Carson Beck, Will Howard, Nico Iamaleava, Kevin Jennings. You have Curtis Work, Maddox Madsen at Boise State, but their offense runs through Ashton Genty.
And he's been terrible down the stretch too.
And you have Jalen Milroe, and then it's either Levitt from Arizona State or Rocco Becht at Iowa State. None of them are elite quarterbacks. So to me, is it I think we talked about this last week, is the elite positional unit or the elite difference maker on offense, is that how these games are going to get won? Or is it the elite defense, like Texas, I think, is starting to get into that category? I think that's the difference this year. I think it's the elite running backs or tight ends. And I know Oregon has that. And look, I'm kind of tainted because I have blue and white glasses on pretty much every Saturday. But if you look at Penn State and their two running backs and their world-class tight end and their defense with a top 5 pick coming off the edge, you're telling me they're not in the mix as like a top 4 title contender? I know James Franklin is the black cloud hovering over this entire team, but if you objectively look at the team, the talent on the team, and not the head coach, this looks like a title contender.
I'm a little bit more skeptical of Aller in general. He'd rank pretty low on some of the stat kind of qualifiers among the quarterbacks of this group. And the Minnesota game really sticks with me. That defense did not look like the defense I kind of signed up for when I was pushing Penn State the first half of the year against a Minnesota team that they can't really run the ball. So it was all through the air. And I thought that was concerning. So to me, I'm looking at Penn State kind of in a similar way that I'm looking at Notre Dame as a team that I don't think can win the title. I think they could win a game or two. I think their draw is really going to matter. But for this game specifically, part of me wants to say this is kind of a prove it spot for Oregon, where it's like, if you're this elite rolling ball of chainsaws that I think you could be if things work out right and you know your team is what you think it can be and what your team has been at times this year, then Oregon should come out and handle this game and prove that they're, you know, the big dog. But then there's part of me saying, if Oregon loses, they're the 5 seed. Like, is Oregon even coming into this game, you know, super fired up? Like, they have a kind of a spot cinched in that would be even better, I think, than their 1 seed. I'm not saying that they're tanking for the 5 seed. What I'm saying is I think that the motivation level might be different. Like, this is Penn State's I know everyone said, like, if not now, when Penn State played Ohio State. And I was very loud at the time saying, guess what? Their goals are still in front of them if they lose that game. And here we are. Their goals are still in front of them. And you could say that they show up to that game, and this is the culmination of their season. The culmination of this whole era is finally winning the Big Ten, finally beating a top 5 opponent, and you don't have to go on the road to do it. You do it, in a neutral field. So I'm going to be betting Oregon just off the strength of how good I think this Oregon team can be and is. They're my pick to win the title right now, but it won't be a confident bet because it won't be a big bet. Is kind of what I should say, because of what I just laid out with Penn State's motivation factor. I didn't give much of credence to that against Ohio State. I'm giving a lot of it right now. And I do think that that's why this line is 3.5, 3.
I think the under is the way to go at 50 points. I think if Penn State's defense is as elite as it is, and look, it showed in spots that it can be, and if Oregon is as elite as we think they are, and look, if you want to poke holes in Oregon's resume, they did give up 31 points to Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd probably lean the under. It's tempting to take Penn State. It is. It's very tempting, at least on my end, knowing that it feels like almost no one's talking about them. And maybe that's the motivation Franklin taps into. Who knows? They could just lay a massive egg and we're back to the same old, okay, well, it's nice that you're hosting a first-round playoff game. You're going to win because it's December in State College and the SEC teams aren't used to that. What are you going to do after that? I just don't. It could very much get to that point.
So I kind of think it's interesting to lay it out like this, since I'm sure we're about to go to the SEC championship game and talk about that. I almost think the SEC championship and the Big Ten championship are like a parlay, no matter what, like based on how the seeding is going to break out here. Like I feel like I keep thinking of the Penn State, Georgia, Penn State, Texas, Oregon, Georgia, like the different permutations of who's the 1 seed, who's the 2 seed, who's 5 through 8, who gets those home playoff games. The ACC is kind of on its island with Alabama. It's like, that whole Alabama is very interested in that. But outside of that, not a big effect on, I think, the seeding. We know SMU would drop, whether that's to 11 or whether that's out. I think it's probably out if they lost.
Most likely out.
Most likely. Or they're the 3 seed. And then the Big 12 and the Mountain West are their own thing where it's winning in. We'll see you. We'll see you when you have to see the 5 seed in the first.
Right. One of them is the 12 seed. One of them is the 4 seed.
It's like kind of taken care of. It's fun for betting purposes, like, do or die games. And it's all, I can't wait to watch. But the real interest is with that SMU Bama thing that we already covered. And then now kind of with the permutations. And do we want to kind of debate what the seeding would be in some of these scenarios? Let's say the favorites won. Let's say Oregon and Texas win. Everything pretty, I think that's the scenario for me as a Notre Dame fan that lines up with Notre Dame getting the Notre Dame spot, as the committee called it in the offseason when they came up with this spot, the 5 seed. And I think that they would bump Penn State below Notre Dame. The debates would start to be, do you bump Penn State below Ohio State? Ohio State beat Penn State, but Penn State took the second loss in the conference championship. I think that would start to be an interesting debate, but I don't think Penn State slides past 7 on the seed. They'd be 5, 6, or 7. In this scenario, I think it'd be 6 or 7. I think Notre Dame goes to 5. I actually think that's one of the less chaotic scenarios.
I could actually make a very strong case that it obviously depends on how the games go, but I think you could go if the 2 favorites win. If Oregon and Texas win, they're 1 and 2. I think you can make a case that Notre Dame's 5, Ohio State's 6, Georgia is 7, and Penn State 8. Because, and here's the logic behind it: Georgia went 1-1 against the number 2 overall team in the country.
It's a good point, but that's kind of factored in now, and like they already have that win over Texas, and Penn State's well above them.
But Georgia also has 2 losses.
Yeah. I think Penn State would be safe from dropping below Georgia unless it's a avoid SEC matchups, avoid Big Ten matchups thing.
I think the easiest thing for the committee to do without arguing about who's 7 through 10 and all this stuff. If you truly want SEC versus Big Ten in those games, I think it's a lot easier to put Georgia at 7, Penn State at 8, and then go, okay, Tennessee, you're the 9, Indiana, you're the 10. That fits in line with how
And
the
then Bama
rankings
goes to
currently are.
Columbus.
And then Bama ends up being the 11th seed. Yeah.
And that's a pretty good game for them. Bama,
right.
Ohio State.
Because I look at how everything's playing out, and the last thing I want to see is Indiana, Penn State, and Georgia, Tennessee. I don't want that. I don't want any combination of all Big Ten or all SEC matchup. I want just straight SEC versus Big Ten. And look, it's very clear that Indiana is not jumping Tennessee. So Tennessee and Indiana are in that order regardless, which means if you drop Georgia to 8 and you drop Penn State to 7, then you're giving me Indiana, Penn State, and Tennessee, Georgia. I've already seen Tennessee, Georgia. I don't need to see Penn State and Indiana. Like,
it wasn't close.
I think if the game was close. Right. I think if the committee comes out on Sunday afternoon and says we rank Georgia 7 and Penn State 8, and we've done that so that we avoid an all SEC and an all Big Ten matchup, because we've seen, with the logic of, we've seen Tennessee versus Georgia before, because Penn State didn't play Indiana in the regular season. But if you have the data point of, we've already seen Tennessee versus Georgia, we want a unique matchup, I think that goes over. Look, college football fans are still going to get upset. That's just the nature of how these things go. But I think you have a lot more goodwill if you say, hey, SEC versus Big Ten, we're worried about the first round. We don't care how the quarterfinals match up.
Then let's say Oregon and Georgia win. Texas is the 5, I think. They love this Texas team. They did it before they even had like a big win against A&M. Like, I don't think they would put Notre Dame above Texas.
I think they would.
That would be great for me. But I really think they leave Texas at the 5. And I think Sankey has been so loud about the conference championships not mattering for them, or not mattering, but not punishing them. I don't know how far they can drop Texas.
6 is their floor.
Yeah.
6 is their floor because they would have 2 losses, and then you can justify Notre Dame, 1-loss team, Texas, 2-loss team, and then slot them right ahead of Ohio State and be, okay, that's done and dusted. It's at least it's a very simple process from there. If Oregon loses, they're the 5.
They're the 5.
They're the 5. I think that's pretty clear cut. And then the debate goes, well, who's number 1?
I think it's Texas. It's Texas if they win. It's Penn State if Georgia wins. Yeah.
Correct. Because then you just have them straight in line, and there's already a buffer between Penn State and Georgia of Notre Dame in the current rankings. So how does 2-loss Georgia jump 1-loss Penn State if they were both to win? I think that's pretty messy.
No chance. Beef was saying that. I don't think that they would. Yeah, I mean that's your Happy Valley porn scenario there with what is it? So it's Penn State and Texas, or no, Penn State and Georgia would have to win. That's your parlay out there. If you want Penn State as the number 1 overall team heading into the first 12-team playoff we've ever had, go put in your Penn State and Georgia moneyline parlays, because I think that does it.
And I think everybody on top of that, just of where the seeding plays out after Saturday, is also looking into the potential matchups. But I think that's more from a fan side of, okay, this team would match up with this team, yada, yada, yada. I think that what the committee is worried about is getting the right 12 teams in. So in this case, the right 8 teams, or 7 really at large teams. And it comes down to Alabama or SMU. If SMU loses, and I think it's pretty cut and dry that Alabama is going to get in over SMU. I'm sorry, like that's just kind of the way things are. SMU, go win your championship game, which by the way they did last year in the AAC. It's also worth pointing out to kind of circle back to the motivation point with Oregon. They lost the Pac-12 championship game last year. Does that in the back of their mind at all? I know it's a different conference, different opponent, but does maybe that kind of reinforce, I guess, at least the internal motivation of what goes on up in Eugene this week?
Yeah, it could. The motivation thing is kind of what I'm worried about with both of the big games here. And I heard someone say this. I don't know where I heard it, but the ACC championship, the Mountain West championship, and the Big 12 championship are being helped tremendously by the 12-team playoffs. The Big 10 and the SEC championship definitely feel smaller than they've felt in years past. And you know what? I'm fine with that for the trade-off of 40 games mattering in the past 4 weeks or however many you want to say. We knew that there'd be some games that would get devalued. In this scenario, it's kind of the SEC and Big Ten championship. And it's kind of why I'm not confidently betting either of them. Like I initially loved Georgia early in the week. And now that you think about it, like they're in no matter what. They just had a gauntlet of a game against Georgia Tech against the rival. Texas is riding high. I have absolutely no read on the SEC title game. You could tell me Texas blows out Georgia, Texas wins a close one, Georgia wins a close one, Georgia wins a blowout. Nothing. I have absolutely no read. No read on the total, no read on the side. I'm just going to be sitting back and rooting for Texas, to be honest, because I do think it helps out Notre Dame. We don't even have to have the Texas-Notre Dame debate if Texas wins. So as a Notre Dame fan, and I guess here's a scenario I'll throw at you, Tansy, or not scenario, just as a Notre Dame fan, what should I be rooting for? There's obviously I should be rooting for the 5 seed where you get the Mountain West and the Big 12 combo in 2 weeks. Is it worse to be the 6 seed who plays Alabama probably in the first round, and then you'd have to play the ACC champ in the second round? Or would you rather be the 7 seed in a scenario that Oregon and Texas lost? Let's say Penn State and Georgia win. They give Oregon the 5. They give Texas the 6. And they give Notre Dame the 7. Would you rather be the 7 playing Indiana but having to go play the SEC champ?
Nope, you don't want that. You don't want that in that scenario because Georgia's sitting there and Georgia's got the only coach who's won a natty in the field. You don't want that. You want 5 seed or bust.
6 seed is like, I don't want the 6 seed, but I'll settle for it. 7 seed is the Happy Valley scenario I just gave with the Penn State number 1 parlay. That's the nightmare scenario for Notre Dame, especially if Texas were to like lose a close one and they for sure get locked in over Notre Dame. We don't know. The one interesting part there would lock in a Texas-Alabama 6-11 game in all likelihood. So that might give them another reason to put Notre Dame above Texas, kind of to your point earlier. And that would be Texas, Indiana, and then it would stay Ohio State, Tennessee in that 8-9. But that's some people might feel like they need like a pen and paper writing out all these permutations and scenarios while we're talking along. But I do think it's fun to kind of have these conversations before they happen, because one of the things we just laid out is going to be the hot button topic on Saturday night. The one fun thing is that we find out on Sunday morning.
The one thing we know for certain is people are going to complain about how the black bracket is aligned regardless of what happens on Saturday. Even if Oregon and Texas win and SMU wins and the top 3 go to chalk, there's going to be a debate about, well, is Notre Dame a worthy number 5? Should Penn State and Georgia, the scenario we kind of played out is who should be ranked in front of who, and are they serving the conferences instead of actually doing something for the college football fan with the way they align them? I think the most fascinating thing to me is, look, if the favorites win, so if Oregon, Texas, SMU win, the fascinating thing to me is, and this is something that it's a personal preference of mine, I want SEC versus Big Ten, but are you going to cater to just how the rankings are and give us a Georgia-Tennessee rematch and give us Indiana versus Penn State? Or are you going to play the rematch card and say Tennessee and Georgia already played, we already saw how that happened, and flip the 4 and
they won't announce that.
They might.
I think they might do it, but I don't think they'll say it.
You'd be surprised. I think that they might, if they get asked specifically about that.
They will.
They might. It's a possibility. But I don't think that's something they would say right away. I think that's something ESPN has to like prompt. Reese Davis has to prompt Ward Manuel with of, hey, why are these teams like this?
I'll give Reese credit. And by the way, I think this is like such a weird kind of segment to do. Reese Davis corner. I think this has been like the year of Reese Davis. I feel like in years past with College Game Day, I've appreciatedly. We always love Kirk. McAfee's first year there, I felt like we were like, wow, what a phenomenon with McAfee on that show. This is the year where I'm like, man, Reese Davis is the best. Like the monologues start the show. I listen to his podcast now, but I actually think the best work he does is talking to the college football chair committee chair at the end of the year. He never takes it easy. Like he drills in on them. Last week, even when he was like, so these teams aren't gonna move, right? Like, and Ward was like, no, and he's like, you might have just locked yourself into something there, but I'll hold you to it. Like Reese, a random little segment I had to do there, but I think Reese Davis is the best.
Also, that Tuesday night show is an abomination. Like the second the rankings are out, I turn it off. The amount of like spin that between Galloway and Booger and Greg McElroy, the amount of spin they try and put on anything is just like it feels like they're just making things up. Because the Indiana thing a few weeks ago, I think Galloway said, "Oh, Indiana should sit Curtis Rourke because it does like."
Although I kind of did do the same thing. It was a little different because Aller was announced as hurt, but it was funny. I did kind of do the same thing when Penn State played Ohio State. I was like, they should just sit Aller, and if they lose, be like their quarterback was hurt. But that's a little different than saying a quarterback who's fully healthy should sit out.
It was just like some of the most baffling takes come from that, and there's nothing gained from it. It's just unorganized yelling.
I do like the interview with the committee guy. But that's
you need that. You absolutely need that. But the takes just fly, and they're really, really bad.
And then they go to Heather Dinich, who spent the entire weekend telling everyone like, "Oh, well, don't be so sure Miami's dropping below Alabama. Like the committee has never dropped a team more than X amount of spots with just one loss without the other team beating a ranked team." And it's like, well, guess what? They did it, Heather.
They did.
So like, we're going to go to you for 10 minutes now to do on the telestrator thing after you were dead wrong for the last 48 hours all over Twitter. Right. Like it's that whole broadcast is a joke.
It's one thing. It's one thing to present facts of what the committee has done in the past, but you also have to interject a little bit of kind of opinion into those facts as well. Because if you just straight shoot those facts, well, look, records and trends are meant to be broken.
Yeah, and the all-state playoff predictor had Miami at like a 42% chance on Saturday night after they lost.
if you go to the ESPN playoff predictor for your playoff odds, just in general, you need to kind of reevaluate how you approach things with that.
Chris Fallica, the Bear on Fox Sports 1, he's like, can ESPN bet offer a price on that number there so I can get minus 150 or whatever it is, because we know that they won't offer that because the playoff predictor's BS. He was like kind of railing on his former employer there a little bit, but he was like, let me tell you the chances of Miami making the playoff 0.00%.
Let's get into the games this weekend. There are 9 conference championship games. I'll go through all of them and we'll start, we'll just go chronological order. So Western Kentucky plays Jacksonville State in the CUSA championship. The fascinating thing to me is Rich Rod's down at Jacksonville State, and there's a certain subset of West Virginia Twitter that wants him back.
That's awesome.
I
kind of love it.
I love that. I'm like, I don't think that's the way you want to go. Neither is Dan Mullen or a Chip Kelly type, but this should be a fun game.
I like Dan Mullen.
Yeah, he's good. I think it's probably better if he stays in the TV booth. There's a lot of young offensive minds that are probably better options if West Virginia wants to go that way. I mean, look at Kitley going to FAU. That's a perfect type of hire at a mid-major level that in probably 3 to 4 years, we're talking about him as a Power 5 head coaching candidate. In this game, look, the offense is it's very different. Jacksonville State loves to run the ball. Western Kentucky loves to throw the ball. This, to me, is going to be an interesting game because they just played each other. 19-17, Western Kentucky won. I lean the under in this game at 57.5, just because I think there is a lick of defense played on both sides. And as much as you want to contrast with pass versus run, Jacksonville State's run game is very, very good.
Yeah, I don't have anything on any of the Friday night games. The one that I'll kind of UNLV Boise, obviously the win and in game there. I didn't know this until this week. Is this a new Mountain West thing that they're playing the conference championship at home?
I didn't realize that until this week either because
I
it
thought they
has
played
been.
them in Vegas. Yeah.
They did, yeah. They've played this one in Vegas, yeah.
And that's when I was initially looking at this, I was like, oh no, is Boise having to go to Vegas here to play UNLV? But no, it's at home on the
They're
blue
probably
turf.
doing it to give the top ranked team in the conference the advantage.
Yeah, which I like. I
That's
generally
fair.
actually think it's fine. I would be fine with that across all of them, to be honest. But the shame of it is Boise really has not been nearly as good down the stretch. You look at like 28-21 against the Nevada team, 17-13 against a bad Wyoming team. Even Oregon State, it kind of was like a laboring to put them away and win by 16. UNLV, they play a lot of close games as well. Like they already lost a game to Boise, and that game was in Vegas, so it's not like that was a road game on the blue turf. They barely beat Hawaii out on the island about a month ago. So I'm staying away, but I think that there's going to be a lot of people who think Boise's free, or if not free, but like a money line, their money line and stuff. I think this game's coming down to the gun. I would
Yeah, I think
lean
so too.
Boise figuring it out, but yeah, close.
And by the way, in the AAC championship game, Tulane is at Army. Games up at West Point. Tulane head coach John Summerall is one of the hottest coaching candidates.
Yeah.
I don't know if he'll go anywhere because it's his first year at Tulane, coming from Troy. Fun fact: he's played the option offense 3 times in his head coaching career. Those teams have scored a collective 9 points on his defenses, including a 35-0 win over Navy this season.
That's a pretty good stat. I know that there's a lot of Kentucky fans. He was supposed to be the Kentucky coach last year. A lot of Kentucky fans dying for them to fire Mark Stoops so they can hire Summerall before someone else does.
Somebody will. I don't know if it's this year, but somebody will hire. I don't think North Carolina or West Virginia is it worth it, is basically what I'm saying, to get to that point. We'll see how that goes, but Tulane -5 is my game. Playing that game, Tulane's been playing incredible defense. It doesn't scare me that it's a road game for them, and the stats against the option are pretty strong as well. In the MAC, Miami, Ohio against Ohio. The only thing I have to say about this is Ohio got rated in the transfer portal, and the fact that they're here is just simply incredible. And unfortunately, that game, it kind of takes a back burner to Iowa State and Arizona State in the Big 12.
Yeah, and why did they put the Big 12 game at noon?
It's been like that.
It's so dumb, especially when now there's so many more West Coast teams. I love Arizona State in that game, one of the best teams in the country against the spread. I apologize for my voice to the people out there fighting through here. I'm questionable for this weekend, but Arizona State only favored by 2. They've been so good against the spread. Kenny Dillingham, I think, should be the national coach of the year.
He's done a fantastic job. A weird situation playing out in the Sun Belt. So Marshall is a 6-point dog at Louisiana. Their head coach, Charles Huff, is apparently without a contract for next year. That's a fun little wrinkle. Former Nick Saban assistant's done a pretty good job at Marshall. So apparently there's some sort of internal conflict going on there where he doesn't have a contract for next year, and he's in the Sun Belt championship game. So that's a thing. But I think Louisiana wins that game. They've been playing really, really, really good football of late. A lot of teams in Louisiana have. Tulane, Louisiana. You could make a case LSU might be like the 3rd or 4th best team in their own state this year, which is crazy, but it also speaks to kind of the caliber of program. And then you have Penn State, Oregon, and Clemson, SMU. I think we're both on SMU. We're both on Arizona State. I'm taking Tulane. It's very weird to see a conference championship weekend with all spreads at a touchdown or less. Usually there's and I guess this is heaping praise now on the conferences for eliminating divisions, eliminating the ACC Coastal and the Big Ten West, because all of a sudden you have teams that can compete, not 5-loss Pittsburgh or 8-4 Iowa coming in as 21-point favorites. So I guess that's the fun wrinkle to how realignments shape these things, is now that we no longer have in divisions in a majority of these conferences, we actually get the 2 best teams, and at least according to the spreads, competitive games.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a fun weekend for sure. It's a shame that I feel like I don't have a lot of I have my Bama to make the playoffs take, which is basically an SMU money line take, but I uh I don't have a lot of strong conviction on any of the games besides Arizona State other than that.
Are there going to be any blowouts among the Power Four?
I think SMU. I think SMU would be the most likely, which I think they might be the smallest spread, but I think they might be the most likely.
I think ASU might roll Iowa State. Their offense is playing so well. Levitt's kind of an underrated quarterback there, and Cam Scattaboo is the best player in that game.
Yeah, I think Arizona State has a chance to. I'm not an Iowa State guy. I do feel like Iowa State uglies up games to make them closer than even they should be sometimes. But I really don't want Iowa State in the playoff. I think they're incredibly boring.
No.
I think Arizona State's at least fun. Even I guess as someone who might be the 5 seed, I should want Iowa State, but I think they stay.
Yeah, look, if you're the 5 seed in any of these playoffs scenarios, so in your case, Notre Dame, potentially Oregon, you don't want to see Arizona State. Arizona State will at least muck it up and be competitive, whereas I think Iowa State is probably the worst possible, at least in terms of the totality of the 12-team field, to bolster the strength. I think Arizona State has clearly shown that the best in the Big 12.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is pretty clear. But I think Arizona State, SMU, I think on a money line parlay or a spread parlay is kind of where, for the most part, the two of us are in agreement, which means Iowa State's going to ruin that in the noon window. That's how things go. But for Mark Henry Jr., I am Joe Tanzi. Thank you again for listening all season. We'll be back next week. Playoff preview. This is the first time we get to do something like this. The first round playoff preview with 4 games at campus sites happening on the 20th and the 21st. Very excited to break into that. And guess what? The most wonderful time of the year starts next Saturday, bowl season. Schedule's a little different because of the playoff, but bowl season is upon us, and it's one of the favorite betting times of the year. So tune back next week as we break down the playoff. We finally have a bracket after next week. And this week, well, it's either Alabama or SMU. That's the big decision to be made. Thanks again for listening, and best of luck on your bets.